So the next thing we're going to talk about is revenue generation for the parts department and how we're comparing the parts department to the sales department. And I wanted to ask you, Chuck, in what ways does the parts department contribute to the dealership's bottom line? Because we were talking about how it's always been this way where the back end tends to support the front. And I think it's just increasing even more, like it's generating more revenue than the front. And
hmm
then what dealers are focusing on more so in the last few years of really just getting more revenue in the fixed operations. So, in your opinion, what ways can the parts department contribute to the bottom line?
Well, the parts department can be very profitable. Obviously, and we don't do a lot of this at PartsEdge as much because the 20 groups such as NADA and NCM and so forth really put a focus on department expenses. But one of the things that we see is the profitability of parts operation. What do you matrix? What do you don't matrix? I mean, just to give you a perfect example, yesterday we had a dealer who reached out. He said, my parts department hasn't made a profit so far this year. And we put together a profit, a gross profit report, especially on customer pay and whatnot. And a lot of their maintenance items, they were making very low gross, 12 to 18%,
Wow.
and after we analyzed the whole thing based on their matrix, which was pretty fair, less than 2% of their inventory was being matrixed. We're having a sale price that justified what they need in a gross. So, looking at the gross profit of the overall department, we tend to see a lot of times where the parts department is forced to sell maintenance items well below normal grosses. The service department gets the labor, but the parts department is holding low grosses like on oil filters, cabin filters, air filters. And, I always say this about car dealerships. When I know me personally, I still take my two vehicles into the OE dealer because I know the technicians know the vehicle more, and I know I'm going to pay more for parts. Car dealerships, you could call them the Nordstroms
Mm-hmm.
of auto repair. If I want it done cheaply, I can go to the aftermarket, and there's great aftermarket companies out there, and I can get the parts cheaper through an aftermarket like a Napa or a Kragen or, a CarQuest. But in reality, I want the OE quality. And so to charge a little bit more for it without ripping the customer's head off, and we've certainly seen some areas where people do that, and that's the other thing, Kaylee, is, typically you only matrix your captive OE parts. And some of the matrix tables we've seen are just so outdated and so unrealistic, it almost makes it sale proof for a service advisor to sell a water pump repair. And so those are the types of things that balancing out what we see is that parts departments that are having a hard time are not remaining profitable. It typically has to do with low gross sales on customer pay parts more than anything, or they're giving way too deep a discount in wholesale.
So, why do you think that's happening? Is it because they're not reviewing their matrix enough? Do they not have enough sources to, accurately matrix the right parts? What is
Probably a combination of both. I mean, what we've discovered, especially with the clients that we've dealt with, when, usually what has brought this to bear is, everybody seems to be chasing warranty uplift. And why we don't do warranty uplift, we can certainly report what they've been making on their sales in the parts department. And it's really kind of an eye opener for a lot of these dealers and parts managers to look at their overall gross profit, especially on customer pay. And they're like, wow, gee, we're holding some real low grosses here. And, a periodic review of that is going to really go a long way in making sure the department remains profitable. And especially when you see a fixed ops director involved or a dealer who's very involved in fixed operations. And I had to go through this I became a fixed ops director after working in parts, is I realized, you have to keep a happy balance between service and parts, and there's a way to do that. And typically where I see is when a service manager is totally fixated or paid off of labor sales and nothing on parts, the last thing they care about is parts. Where they're paid off of it as a percentage, and vice versa. Maybe the parts manager is paid off of labor sales hours and parts gross profit. That's where they tend to start working with each other to make sure and maintain that both departments are equally profitable and can absorb the expenses, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that comes up a lot whenever I talk about just how they can work together. I'm like, I feel like it always boils down to pay plans. I mean, yeah, money doesn't, it shouldn't be the whole reason, but it really is. If they're not paid off of parts, they don't really care about it. It's just
Yeah,
a
in fact,
matter of fact.
the other thing, and this is, you know, for lack of understanding, we talked to a dealer yesterday that they were having a problem with shrinkage. And what they were doing is they were putting oil filters and cabin filters and air filters out in the service bay to try and eliminate that time for a technician to go to the counter, get the parts, and come back. Well, the biggest problem they've had that's worked as far as productivity wise, but they've been forgetting to build the parts out.
Oh no, yeah.
And so the way that they explained it, how they caught the problem was, under Toyota Care, the warranty clerk went back and said, hey, you don't have anything charged out here. So, that's where, those types of things can really hurt a parts department as well, is, making sure everything's getting charged out. That's the number one thing since COVID that I've seen is when there's been shortages in the parts department. It's not that anybody's stealing, but they're so short-handed. They hand out the parts and they go, okay, I'll do this. I got to get to the phone or whatever. And they forget to bill them out, and I always bring this little scenario up because it sounds, once you listen to it, the math is really simple. If you forget to charge out $50 a day, just $50 in parts, whatever it is. Maybe it's one module one day for $200, maybe $20 the next day, but let's say an average of $50 a day with 20 working days in a month. That's $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year that you're short. So you can catch it on warranty because they'll deny the claim and go, you don't have parts charged out. But what you're not catching is internal and customer pay if they forget to bill it out.
Yep.
So, making sure that things get charged out, making sure that you're maintaining good profitability. Let's face it, Kaylee, one of the things you and I have heard over and over again over the last 3 years is we're just really short in our department. We can't find anybody to work. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why we fill that gap to give them some time back, but that's part of the problem, is they're so short-handed at times that, it has created, in some instances, the ability to get parts charged out in an effective way. So that's another way.
That makes sense. Yeah.